Byzantine art. When I use the term Byzantine art, I am referring to the art of Constantinople and the regions under its influence. Constantinople was founded by the Roman Emperor Constantine I on the site of an already existing city, and this city was called Byzantium. It's also been referred to, after this period anyway, as the Second Rome, because it becomes the capital of the Roman Empire. So as we talked about before, Constantine moves the capital of the Roman Empire here to Byzantium, and he renames it Constantinople. Originally, or at least earlier, I guess I should say, Byzantium was a Greek colony starting around the 7th century BCE. When it becomes the capital of the Roman Empire, Constantine makes it a Christian empire. And he becomes, and his successors become, the emperor appointed by the Christian God to rule. Now, strategically, Constantinople is located very well. It's between the Golden Horn and the Sea of Marmara at the point where Europe meets Asia. So it has control of land and sea routes between Europe and Asia. And anytime you have an area that can control these kinds of trade routes, it becomes very rich. So this city does become very wealthy. Throughout most of the Middle Ages, Constantinople was Europe's largest and wealthiest city. Now, the area actually ends up preserving Greek and Roman culture, and it transmits it to the West. Of course, it's going to be changed slightly as well. The people who live in this place at this time think of themselves as Romans, although we don't really look at them like that today. During the 5th and 6th centuries, in actual Rome, we have the Italian peninsula is under invasions and it's dealing with religious controversy. It's having some issues. But at the same time, the Byzantine Empire, based out of Constantinople, prospers. So Constantinople is secure behind its massive walls, and it's defended by the imperial army and navy. Now, of course, since there's wealthy citizens there, and also the imperial family, they are going to become great patrons of the arts. And the city actually becomes an artistic center, like we saw with Rome before. The Eastern Empire, or the Byzantine Empire as we call it today, was influenced by not only Roman culture, which, obviously they're seeing themselves as Romans, so of course they're going to be influenced by Roman culture, but also some of the cultures that this empire controlled, like Syria, Palestine, Egypt, Persia, and Greece. So these cultures all combined with Roman cultures to create this very distinct Byzantine culture. In the 6th century CE, Byzantine political power, wealth, and culture reached its height under Emperor Justinian and Empress Theodora. Justinian ruled from about 527 to 565 CE. Justinian and Empress Theodora were thought to have ruled as co-rulers. This is a little bit unusual, but not too much. But what's really unusual is Theodora's position. So Theodora is not a descendant of the upper class. She is not a descendant from royalty. Instead, she was originally a courtesan and a circus dancer. Then, eventually, she becomes Justinian's mistress. Justinian apparently was madly in love with her and wanted to marry her. But there was a problem. One, there's this law that forbids him from marrying somebody outside of his class. And two, he's actually married. Well, in 525, his wife dies, so that solves that problem. And then he decides, well, he's going to solve the other problem by changing the law. So he actually changes the law to allow that now he is allowed to marry her. Now, Theodora proves to be very intelligent and Justinian's greatest supporter. Theodora was perhaps the most influential and powerful woman in Byzantine history. Both Justinian and Theodora were Christian, although it is thought that Justinian was Orthodox Christian while Theodora followed another sect. Justinian and Theodora's legacy, in part, is the building program and renovation campaign that they are in charge of in the city. So they restored the city because it had been half destroyed by riots in 532. So what happens is, next door to where this building stands now, there was a hippodrome. And there was a huge riot after a race one day. And Justinian, hears about the riot, and he's kind of like, oh, what should he do? And Theodora says, Justinian, you are the emperor. Go, repress this, restore order. And that's exactly what he does. So after he restores order, they decide they're going to build a new church on this location because the church that had been here was destroyed in that riot. So they built a new church, and they call it the Hagia Sophia, which means Holy Wisdom, the Church of the Holy Wisdom. Now Justinian actually hires two scholars to rebuild or redesign this church, and they are Anthemius of Tralles, who was a specialist in geometry and optics, and Isidorus of Miletus, who was a specialist in physics and also studied vaulting. Now these guys were kind of interesting characters anyway, but just kind of one little piece of trivia about Anthemius. So Anthemius actually invents a type of steam engine. So what we use later to run locomotives, he actually designs a version of that. And unfortunately, he doesn't use it for anything really that productive. He hates his neighbor. He's having some sort of war with his neighbor, right? And he decides that he is going to hopefully annoy and possibly injure his neighbor by building this version of the steam engine under the floor of his neighbor's home. And what happens is the house starts to shake. And of course, the neighbor thinks that there's an earthquake. And so he comes running out of the house and he says, oh my gosh, there's an earthquake. And everyone's like, dude, there's no earthquake. I don't know what you're talking about. And so it kind of like makes him crazy. And then also some versions say that that he was injured. But anyway, so we could have had the steam engine many, many years before we actually had it. But, instead, it's more fun to antagonize your neighbor. But here is the Hagia Sophia, which these two scholars designed. The exterior was rather simple and unadorned, but the interior was meant to transport the worshiper to the level of the supernatural. And what they did is they developed this very daring design that you see here. The building is based on a central plan with a dome inscribed in a square. There are half domes which expand outwards from the central dome to connect with the narinx on one end and the half a dome on the sanctuary apse on the other. The side aisles flank the central core. The galleries or stories open to and overlook the naos and are located above the aisles. The main dome of the church provides a lighted filled canopy above the processional space. So it's so magnificent that legend said it was constructed by angels, although we know it was designed by these two guys. The lighting of the church really seems kind of mystical. Maybe you can see that better here in this image. The interior, which we're going to look at in a second, is covered in mosaics which play with light and made the walls seem to kind of disappear. So maybe you can see that a little bit here. Kind of makes it seem like the dome is sort of floating on this light. Okay, so we are going to watch this really, really old video. So bear with me. It is the best Hagia Sophia video, but it is like from 50, 70, something like that.
The center dome at Hagia Sophia is filled with light. Its dome is a more advanced version of the handkerchief vault at Galla Placidia's tomb. Let us first draw the square base of a dome on pendentives. The square base is called a bay. On top of the square bay we will draw 4 arches. Now the 4 arches are joined together by the dome. The important thing about a dome on pendentives is that the weight or outward thrust of the dome puts no weight on the walls. The outward thrust is only at the 4 corners of the square and only needs to be buttressed at these 4 points. This means that you do not have to have a round drum buttressing the dome all around it, as there was in the Pantheon. This also means that the outside of the building need not be so heavy. The walls can be thinner, with many windows cut into them. It is, of course, windows that bring light into the interior. Here a slice has been cut off the top of this dome, and what is left is called the pendentives. In this drawing you can see that a second dome has been placed on top of the pendentives with a slight space left between the two, in order to allow space for windows and light to enter. This dome on pendentives is similar to the dome at Hagia Sophia. The smaller, flatter dome on top looks like a beret or hat, and does not need buttressing because it is so flat. Here is the view of the very top of the center dome at Hagia Sophia. You can see the many windows that have been placed in the area between pendentives and the flat dome on top. If you sliced Hagia Sophia in half, this is what it would look like. You can see the tall center arch which represents the pendentives in cross view, with a flat dome perched on top. The dome is 108 feet in diameter. Between the flat dome on top and the pendentives, you can see the space left for the 40 windows, which act as a clerestory. On either side of the center dome are half domes, also on pendentives. These push against the center dome, buttressing it. The half domes on pendentives are buttressed in turn by heavy piers that get progressively lower in height. Unfortunately, in 532, when they were building the church, the bricks used were not sufficiently dried before the top layers were laid on. In 558, the original dome fell down, but was rebuilt again slightly higher. In the 10th century, part of it fell down again, but this time, when they rebuilt it, they added a lot more buttressing. Today, the dome rises 180 feet from the floor. From this ground plan, you can see that while the main part of the church is square, the nave is oblong. This is because it is made up of 2 half domes and the center dome. The square area on the far right is the atrium, where the priests instructed the unbaptized. Perhaps you remember the atrium from St. Peter's Basilica in Rome.
Okay, so that gave you a good kind of design overview of the Hagia Sophia. Because, they mentioned in the video that the dome kept falling down. So one of the things that they did to help the building not fall down is they added exterior buttressing, which you can see here in this image. Buttressing is an architectural support, usually consisting of massive masonry built against an exterior wall to brace the wall and counter the thrust of the vaults. It transfers the weight of the vault to the ground, despite rather minor repairs. This structure actually withstood time and numerous earthquakes, and that's one of the reasons that they needed the buttressing.